Oh, I never had anybody shut up for me before. Usually I'm shouting people down. Hello everyone. Who's first? Who's been to one of these before? That's a lot of staff. Welcome home. And who's new to one of these? Welcome home. It's good to have you all here. So the theme this weekend is reinventing radicalism. I feel like I'm underdressed. Hang on. The theme this week is reinventing radicalism. So, hang on, introduce self. I'm Russell, I'm one of the trustees. I'm the one who is probably most annoying, but bless them, they have got me out of the way first this time, I think. So, if I just introduce it, or tell you what, if you're part of the staff, do you mind giving us a wave? Everybody have a look round. These are the staff, they're lovely people. Annoy them at your leisure this weekend. Are there any trustees? Okay, 2 of them are here. There are more trustees to come. That's probably why I've been put out now. And we've also got Sarah Edmund, who is waving at you now. She is a chaplain. She is here for your benefit. Do you want to sort of say a bit about yourself?
Come and chat to me. I'm always up for a cup of tea or a glass of cold water and a chat, so yeah, just come and have a chat with me.
Excellent. So first of all, let's, I guess, kind of get to know each other. So I sort of would go round, we'll do a sort of name, pronouns, quirky icebreaker. How about the last thing you broke? So I'm Russell, he, him, as I say, I'm one of the trustees. Our background is Southampton Uni, but I've been sort of working for a little while. The last thing I broke was at work, and for once, I was actually meant to break something. We had a load of prototype MacGuffins we were getting rid of, and I got to smash them to bits with a hammer. So I'm going to delegate Patrick. Well, the Patrick bit should come with you quite quickly.
Yes, I'm Patrick.
Pronouns.
Oh yes. He, him. What was the last thing I wrote? I was trying to think of that rather than listening to what you said.
I find people often find other things to think about. I'm talking. You broke the ice here. Beth.
I'm Beth, she, her, and last thing I broke, probably a glass or something.
Okay, I'm Ray, she, her, and last thing I broke was incredibly boring. It was a plastic box as I was moving out of my flat.
Can we ask what was in the box?
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Lizzie, she, her, I'm part of the staff team, and the last thing I broke was a glass at Cambridge when I did my Cambridge session there in my rush to tidy up at the end, if you know, which then slowed us all down.
I'm Lara, she, her. I'm also one of the staff members, and the last thing I broke was also glass because I woke up pub and put it away when it's too hot and exploded.
That's exciting.
Hey, I'm Michael, he, him. I'm a student at Sussex Uni, and the last thing I broke was also a glass, but I just knocked over on my desk when it was full of soy milk.
I'm glad we've got plastic cups, because there's been a lot of glasses broken.
Hello, I'm Jennifer, she, her, and actually I'm very good at not breaking things for a very long time. So trying to think of the last thing I broke. It's very impressive. Definitely glass. I think I remember writing in the glass. Yeah, so I'll say it now.
Okay, hi, I'm Sorrel, they, them. I'm a student at Oxford, but I've taken a year out and I just did my year abroad, so it'll be 2 years before in total, since I've been there by the time I go back, so not really. The last thing I broke was this bit on my wheelchair. The little plus, oh, look what. Okay, last thing I broke was this thing on my wheelchair. Because last time I checked, I had what?
Do you want to start with Naomi?
I'm Naomi, I'm CEO of SEM, and my pronouns are she, her. And the last thing I broke was a whole bottle of wine. Was it full? It was completely full.
Was it good
I just was unpacking it from the shopping, put it down on the floor, and it just fell, just like that, like very gently, and completely smashed, and the wine went everywhere.
Was it red or white wine?
Red.
Was it good wine?
Well, I mean, it was very good.
Not after you scooped it back in the bottle.
I'm Maddie, I use she, they pronouns, and I've just finished my teacher training in Bath to be a PE teacher, and I think the last thing I broke was my phone screen, luckily projector, not the screen, when it was between my phone and a shot put, and I decided to save the shot put.
I'm Becca, my pronouns are she, her. I've just started my PhD in Birmingham, and last thing I broke was my freezer drawer this morning. I was making Maddie and I ice lattes, and I was like so ravenous for my ice latte. I like took the freezer drawer out, the ice in, and it snapped.
I'm Julia, he's pronouns she, her. I'm one of the trustees. I work as an engineer. The last thing I broke, it's not very exciting, was a box of breadsticks. I knocked down the top shelf of a cupboard, which I can't reach without a step. Broken breadsticks all over the floor, and it was meant to be having people around for dinner that night, so I had to actually clean the floor.
I'm noticing a culinary theme.
Hi, I'm Melody, she, her pronouns, and the last thing I broke was my water bottle when I dropped it on the floor in a change room in a sauna in Helsinki, trying to buy lots of naked fish.
So I was just about to shout, I do that all the time, and then you went on. And I began to relate less and less and less. So, who are you?
Hello, I'm Sophie, pronouns she, her. I am the fundraiser at SCM. And
Give her your money.
I mean, Patrick's literally just given me an envelope, and I said, "Is there money inside?" It's like a birthday card. Anyway, it's a contact form. And since I walked in and you said what was the last thing you broke, the anxiety levels have gone higher and higher because I literally can't think of anything. But the last thing that I can think of additionally that I broke was my car when I rammed it into the back of somebody on a motorway. But it wasn't that serious, it's fine.
I'm Abigail, pronouns she, her. I've just finished a master's in maths at Southampton and got to start my PhD at Warwick. And the last thing I broke was a glass while packing the dishwasher.
Was that like 2 minutes ago?
No!
Okay.
It was in a dishwasher, we had to wash everything by
But it is another glass.
It is another glass.
Matt?
I'm Matt, he, him, and I was just trying to think what the last thing I broke was, which was probably the packaging on one of the wires, because I forgot to buy wires out of those Tesco's.
I'm Ruth, she, her. I'm an SEM staff member. Also can't remember the last thing I broke, but like one of the more recent things was our wireless Hoover that just I had propped precariously and it fell and smashed. Very sad day.
Or Hoover.
Yeah.
That sucks.
There's solidarity.
Hi, I'm Phoebe, she, her. I'm in my, I'm in my third year, sorry. I'm in my
Not doing that,
third year.
sorry.
No. I'm doing applied theatre at LIPA. I won't explain what it is because I don't really understand it. And the last thing I broke was the bumper on my new car.
Wasn't hers.
Yeah.
Was it?
No, I tried to reverse, which isn't a good idea, and there was a wall and it just came out of nowhere. So I guess I also broke the wall.
Moving swiftly onwards.
I'm Sarah, she, her. I think I have the best job in the world because I spend a lot of time talking to people, hearing their stories, and then working out where God might be in that. And there's a lot of tea involved. Tea and cake.
What have you broken?
Oh, what have I broken? I broke my laptop screen this week, which has caused no end of trauma as I was trying to prepare for today. That's just like if it's rubbish, it's not my fault. So I've borrowed a computer.
I'm Joanna, I studied maths and psychology at Birmingham, and the last thing I remember breaking was one of the keys on my clarinet.
Ooh, which one?
Which clarinet or which key?
I'm Jen, she, her. I am SCM's finance administrator, so give me all the money. And I think the last thing I broke was my oven door because I slammed it too hard in a foot of range. And now it doesn't close at all.
Well, that brings me to one of my first notices, which is none of us are expected to cook this weekend. The catering, as you've noticed already, is excellent. However, you might be expected to do some washing up. So Amelia over here is responsible for the washing up rota, so be nice to her. She has more power than anybody else here, I think, this weekend.
The list is on the pinboard if you want to fill any of the leftovers.
And if she catches you with your hands in your pockets, you might find your name appearing. So a couple of bits about the programme for this weekend. So tonight at 9 o'clock, we've got a bonfire, which is jolly exciting, and we'll be joined by the community of the Cross of Nails, who'll be Cross of Nailsing us. Thank you, presenting us as a Cross of Nails. We did go through the notices. So we've also got workshops tomorrow. So you'll see on the schedule what they all are. Outside on the table, just outside, there should be sign-up forms for each of those. So we've got a rough idea of. Oh, so the sign-up sheets are on the wall. Which wall are they on?
The one at the far end.
The one at the far end. You can't miss it. There's also out there, if you've forgotten anything like toothbrush, deodorant, there's a little bowl of essentials just around the corner that you can help yourself to if you need. We've also worked in more free time than we've had in previous years, so you can bond and enjoy it is an amazing sight, isn't it? Last time we got told explicitly we weren't allowed to touch the farm equipment. I've not been given that notice this year. So I'm choosing to believe that means we can crack on. Lick a tractor. So over there, you will see, this is where your airline starts off now. So on the left is our merch, which is great. Please buy it. It is some wonderful stuff. I've got quite a lot of it myself. And on the right, we have been given a load of stuff by the Progressive Christian Network. So that's also great because it's free. So do help yourself to that. Fill your boots. Also, while I'm doing the airline bit, if there's a fire, run out that way, turn left, and you'll see a sort of straight path going up with a gate marked private on it. If there is a fire, disregard that notice and go nuts. That's the fire muster point, so we'll be counting you all up in there. So going forward, the keynotes will all be live streamed. So I'm staring into two cameras right now. I'm staring into one camera and being told which one not to stare into. Matt here will be, so it's only the keynote talk, so it's not going to be the workshops or anything like that. So you can tune in if you don't feel like coming in. If you don't want the back of your head being on stream, Matt, where is the safe zone?
That side of the pillars over there.
That side of the pillars is the zone of anonymity. Hello?
If in the question section,
Yeah.
will that be live streamed as well? Or is that not?
It is, but I can always turn the mics off if people would.
Okay. Washing up, we've done. And Here's the one where I couldn't read your note, so I rewrote it, and I can't read that either. Right, that's it. During the weekend, Ruth will be running around taking videos for, who is it for again?
Affirming Christianity.
And
So
what?
it's for us, but
Yes.
it's for a specific course that we're running. So if you are comfortable sharing your name, pronouns, sexual and gender identity, and something about yourselves, interesting or otherwise, please do. Well, I'll be asking people. If you're not comfortable, that's totally fine. But if you are comfortable, then great. We'll do that. It will be shown to a course of people, so it won't be on social media or anything like that. So that's what it's going to be used for.
So that it's
It
progressive.
will be quite public though, like, so,
Yeah.
we will be out there in the world.
Yes.
This is sort of like progressive affirming alpha courses, kind of.
Yeah.
So the idea is that rather than giving people, so this particular bit is for our allyship course, so it's for churches and groups, allowed care own groups, who want to grow in their support of LGBTQ plus people. And we thought rather than giving them a glossary to read of all the different kind of identities and the way that they intermingle and so on, we thought it would be nice if it was peopled. So it's like a living glossary, if you like. So it'd be like quick fire, one person after another after another. Is the idea, but we put out a call and we got one person. So at the moment there's a lot of pressure and focus on them.
I'll also be taking general videos and photos and doing annoying like that. So if you do not want to be in our social media comms, printed media stuff, let me know. But otherwise, I will assume you are okay to be plastered everywhere on SEM comms.
Lovely stuff. So I'm going to start off with a reading, which is Matthew 5, verses 1 to 11. Us being radical and all that, I thought that we had to come from the Street Bible, which apparently we all know about. I was wondering if I was showing my age here. I was going to say, if you ever want to know how cool people in the early 2000s didn't speak, read this. Part of I love it. It's brilliant. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, there was a sort of period towards the late 90s, early 2000s, when the church decided that what kids really wanted was rap music, graffiti, skateboarding, and Jesus. And it's all sort of encapsulated in this wonderful paraphrasing of the Bible. So buckle up. Jesus sees a troop of groupies is growing. It gets less bad, I promise you. Jesus sees how the troop of groupies is growing, so he goes up to the nearest hill and lets them follow. They listen in as he teaches his team. I'll tell you who'll laugh last. The people who don't think too much of themselves. Thank goodness for that. Who know they're a mess. Their ticket to heaven's already in the post, first class. I'll tell you who'll still be laughing. The people who know about grief. Who don't shove the mess behind the sofa, but face it. God himself is going to put his arm around them. I'll tell you who'll laugh longest. The modest, gentle types who don't go around gabbing. They'll get given the world. Who'll be laughing? The people who only want to do the right thing. Like it's their food and drink. Their good news in tray is piled high. Who'll be laughing? The people who don't hold grudges, who forgive and forget. They'll be treated likewise. Who's laughing deep down already? The people who aren't polluted with stuff that mugs the heart. They'll get to see God. Who's laughing deep down? The people who stop fights and start friendships, who turn fists into high fives. They'll get known as God's children. Who's laughing? The people who get slapped down for doing the right thing. They get given the security code to heaven's gate. I'm not making eye contact with half of you. And you're laughing if people despise you. You're delirious if they pick on you, if they slag you off just because you're on my...
That's too far.
That's the bit that went too far. If they slag you off just because you're on my side, throw a party, go wild, paint the town. Your bonus in heaven is hitting the humongous mark, because that's exactly what they did to all the couriers who prophesied my arrival. So, kicking us off this weekend, I am very pleased to introduce a woman who needs no introduction. So, I'll crack on.
That's literally it.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Russell. I must say, I felt right at home there. I was young when that was the thing. We didn't talk like that. But I was never cool, so I don't know, maybe there were cool people who did. So one of the things that's really tricky about being a speaker at these kind of events is that you have to decide the title before you write the talk. Reclaiming Radical, the why and the how, or possibly it was Reinventing Radical, the why and the how. That would make sense, wouldn't it? I've written the wrong thing here. Excellent. Excellent. I don't even remember the title of my own talk. It's still not a bad choice, the why and the how. And I'm definitely going to talk this evening about why we need to reinvent the term radical. But I'm only going to offer one idea about how, and I say offer because that's a really important part of what it is I want to talk about. I'm going to offer you one idea of how we reinvent the word radical. So you might be wondering, well, why does it need reinventing or reintroducing? In SCM, we still use the word now and then, but once upon a time, it was at the heart of what SCM had to say about itself. So why did it disappear? For most of you, you'll need to cast your mind back to primary school, maybe to the earliest news stories that you can remember. In the early 2000s, okay, were you all alive in the early 2000s?
Yes.
Okay, I'm like my judgment of that was correct. Okay, that's good. Okay, yeah, my maths wasn't too badly off there. Okay, so in the early 2000s, Islamic fundamentalism was on the rise, and the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and the London bombing, among other things, created a sense of fear which had far-reaching consequences. Over the first 10 years of the decade, religions came under a new kind of scrutiny. I was 25 when 9/11 happened. I'm fairly sure that I'd never heard the term radicalized before then. It's really hard to remember because, like, you're not exactly keeping stock at the moment of like what words you already know and what words you don't. But I don't think I had. And I certainly don't think the word radical itself had any negative connotations. Maybe the word sounded a little historic, a little bit sort of 1970s. Remember, we were in the early years of a very pragmatic Blair government back then. The year before 9/11, the word radical, at worst, I think, might have sounded a bit passé. The prevent agenda, which you all grew up with, came out of that spike in fear. Religion went from being a minority pastime which didn't raise any eyebrows to being a potential source of danger. Colleges and universities were expected to monitor religious activity with a suspicious eye. I worked in chaplaincy in those years, building bridges across faiths, enabling conversation and understanding. Those are the things that became the primary task of chaplaincy in those years. In that atmosphere, retaining the word radical in a religious organization for young people would have been really stupid. It's hard to explain. Yes, we want our young people to be radical, just not that sort of radical. And even if you could explain it, it doesn't really take responsibility for the fact that faith is a phenomenally powerful thing. We shouldn't bandy around words like radical without some careful thought about what we're doing. Christian terrorism is not unknown. If we assume it couldn't happen to us, then we're allowing Islamophobia or racism to shape our thinking. So at some point in the 2000s, the word radical was dropped. I've got a little example of the change in SCM. So once upon a time, we had the fist of protest bleeding as it grasps the crown of thorns. And look what we had in the early 2000s. Some think bubbles leading to the crown of thorns. Well, why do we need the word radical back? Because the planet is warming because women's rights are being eroded, because toxic nationalism is rising, because people are hungry, because queer Christians are being hurt, and because the faith based on the God of love is being twisted and used for hate. SEM didn't stop being radical when we retired the word, but reclaiming the word is part of making sure that we never lose the mandate to push for far-reaching change, for real progress on matters of injustice, for imaginative theology, which challenges us and others, for pushing way past the religious bullies to find every student who's been excluded from the community of faith and bring them to a safe place to belong. Over this whole weekend, we're going to think about what it means to be radical in a changing world. And as well as a whole load of lovely workshops, there is a keynote each day, and we'll be offering different but connected takes on the theme of reinventing radical. Just before I go any further, Matt, would you mind turning that, there's a screen, the screen to your right is, oh my goodness, the relief. It was reflecting the sun, like, I've just got a big bright light in front of my eyes, which will fade away now. So my suggestion for reinventing and reclaiming the word radical is to say that we need a radical morality. Morality might not be what you expected me to talk about. I wonder if you have a think for a moment about the word morality. What does it mean to you? Why might you not have expected me to talk about it? I'm guessing that some of the things that came into your head were negativity, bullying, other people's views being pushed onto you or onto other people. Maybe some good things came into your head about the word. Some of us, though, have quite negative feelings about the term morality, and I'm going to explore a little bit about why. In the SEM office last week, a lovely couple who met at SEM in the 1960s, I love these stories, they met at SEM in the 1960s, and they're still together all these years later, and they still support us as friends of the movement. Yeah, which means they give us money. And last week they sent me a package. I'll be honest, I do love a parcel. If you don't love a parcel, we have a session on Christian minimalism tomorrow that you might like to go to. If you love a parcel as much as I do, we have a session on Christian minimalism that might be good to go to tomorrow. But I digress. The parcel was full of spectacularly retro advertising. I'd meant to bring some of it with me to show you. So it's really 1960s looking, and they kept it so beautifully. It was also neat. So there's advertising material from their time as students, and they had these lovely little cards advertising the talks that they were doing in the autumn of 1966. One of these talks was about sex. And people are still in favour of sex. It's good to know. So I had a feeling that the woman who was bold enough to lead a talk about sex as a glorious gift from God back in the 1960s was going to be a pretty phenomenal kind of a woman. So I looked her up. Her name's Dr. Anna Bidder, and I'm so happy that I looked her up. She was clearly a phenomenal woman, and I feel like I should have already heard of her. Aside from being an impressive zoologist academic, aside from co-founding and being the first president of a Cambridge college, she was also a committed Quaker. I mean, which is obviously the best thing about her. And she held discussion groups for young people in her home. She then worked with a group to write an explosive report towards a Quaker view of sex. This report was incredibly radical. It rejected any notion of sex being sinful, and it was one of the first places where Christians put their necks on the line to be affirming of homosexuality. What is that, if not radical morality? But something happened after those years of unpicking centuries of shame as progressive Christians. Somewhere along the line, we stopped using the word moral to talk about what we believe. I think the trouble is we've given up the idea of morality to small c Christian conservatives. If we went on YouTube, I might say the big C conservatives. Nothing. You just end that sentence for yourself. But you might say that, well, the reason that we've left morality as a word that describes their stuff is because it's their approach to faith, to tell people what they ought to do. And progressive Christians teach a more questioning, more open approach to faith. Well, yes, but also no. We do teach some very definite things. Let's take fair trade, for example, which was very much something that my era of students would have campaigned about. I think it's much less so these days. But nevertheless, there are many progressive Christians in this country who would not be caught dead with a Tetley tea bag. It's a fairly straightforward interpretation of Luke 10:7. The labourer deserves to be paid. Likewise, welcome of refugees, forgiving of international debt, opposition to nuclear weapons. These are things we're comfortable to teach rights and wrongs about in more progressive churches and in SCM groups. You might say, but these are geopolitical matters. The difference is that we don't teach personal morality. Well, actually, we do. It's just different personal morality. We teach that we should respect a person's pronouns, that you're allowed to love a person no matter your or their gender, that consent is vital in all contexts where we enter one another's space, that we have autonomy over our own bodies. There are differences, but we have morals just the same. So what would a radical approach to morality be? What would widen our horizons to make more good possible? My argument is that we get into the business of morality like we got into spirituality. We don't leave it to Christians with narrow interpretations of faith to do that. In schools and colleges, SMSC, or Spiritual, Moral, Social and Cultural Education, is part of the Ofsted framework. Yet, despite the fact that the world outside thinks we are in the morality business as much as in the spirituality game, we've been shy of it. But if we reinterpret morality through our experience of spirituality, it's a whole different matter. We recognize that in each Christian person, spirituality is manifested differently. We're called to focus on a different area of the spiritual life, and they're not all compatible, but we don't worry about that. We expect there to be different expressions of spirituality. Why not different expressions of morality? Some people like to contemplate in silence. Some read. Some create crafts or pictures. Some have mystical experiences. Some like to sing for hours on end. Some love the liturgy of the Celtic tradition. Some love evensong. Some use ancient spiritual techniques. Some go for a walk and a think. We're untroubled by the diversity of expression of spirituality. We're comfortable that Christians can be deeply spiritual and growing in their discipleship while being entirely different in their expression of spirituality from the person next to them in the pew. But we're not quite so bold when we talk about morality. We do have the same respect that there is difference, but it is rather more muted. And we're much less likely to plan a course next term on morality than we would be on spirituality. I think those of us who would call ourselves progressive or liberal have two problems with the concept of morality. Firstly, that somehow Christian morality sounds like it can only mean a dour and heavy Victorian morality with a side order of terrifying American right-wing morality. It means the kind of Christian activity in the world that we go around apologizing for and unpicking in ourselves. It means shame. Added to that, there's the uncomfortable possibility that if we suggest something as a moral course of action, we might, in the end, turn out to have been wrong. Taking that second problem first, there are cautionary tales from our own history as well as a lot of inspiration. And this is the trouble with trying to live out and share our views of right and wrong. The same bright young Victorian and Edwardian SCMers from the early days of the movement thought it was right to evangelize the world with the kind of missionary activity which has left the scars of racism and colonialism across the world. At the same time as Henry Drummond was breaking open the hearts and minds of students by inviting them to use all their critical thinking in their faith as well as in their studies. At the same time, many were preparing to go out and extend the kingdom with an urgency that didn't stop to consider whether they were being invited. There was so much good and so much bad all tangled up together in those days. And there's a lot we don't know about that time. The cautionary tale, though, is not just to avoid their particular mistakes, but to engage with right and wrong with a lot more humility. Humility isn't really a word that we associate with morality. The kind of people that are enthusiastic about morality are usually pretty sure of themselves. But knowing that generations before us got some things so wonderfully right and other things so terribly wrong shouldn't lead us to put our radical voice in the cupboard. It just demands of us that we use it carefully. I have a whole list of things that I've heard SCM members talk about and care passionately about. At the moment, you won't find that list anywhere on our website. We all know of conservative membership organisations which demand that members sign up to a statement of beliefs. That's not the open-minded, critical thinking or the loving inclusion that SCM always wants to offer. And I'm not suggesting that we change that now. SCM will never be an organisation which demands that there's stuff you have to believe in order to belong. But there are things that a lot of us have in common when it comes to things we think are right and important. Matters about the environment, human dignity, higher education, peace and reconciliation, and also a whole load of issues relating to the church. So we have an odd conundrum. We're cautious about morality, but we have things that we feel really strongly about, things that we think are right. The heart of the matter is that second problem. We're nervous about the consequences of morality. Going back to that 1960s talk on sex reminds us of one of the most awful consequences of when morality is misused: shame. We've all experienced times when other people's morality has directly or indirectly demanded that we should feel ashamed. We've all heard stories of people who've suffered the crippling, sometimes lethal results of even worse experiences of shame. Shame is centered on humiliation. It describes the degradation of personhood that comes from the fear that we are worthless. Quite rightly, progressive Christians have pushed it away to make more room for the God of love. But somewhere along the line, we lost our courage to say that we should feel something when we get stuff wrong. Think of Marta Kaufman this week. Tell me that, like, Friends remains a cultural thing that you all know about. Like, I know it's from my era, but my understanding is that it's kind of still out there. Yeah, there was a pleading in my voice. Yeah. How to get old overnight. Go and work for an organisation full of young people. I was quite young before I came to work at SCM. So Marta Kaufman wrote Friends. And during this week, you might have heard her describing her embarrassment at the mistakes that she made when writing Friends without Black people and with jokes made of gay and trans people. Anyone who read her words of regret would surely say that it's right to know when we are wrong. It's right to say so and to accept the consequences. One of the confessions in the Anglican Book of Common Prayer describes remembering our sins as grievous unto us. The term grief might be really helpful. A real acceptance that something has gone wrong and a real feeling about it. But a feeling which, with God's love and the community around us, we can recover from. Perhaps grief isn't the right word. Perhaps sorrow is another good word. A regret that comes from a deep sadness, or with deep sadness. But throwing out any kind of sense of feeling when we've done something truly wrong has never been what we meant when we tried to eradicate the vile concept of shame from the Christian lexicon. Saying I'm not sure what the right word is here is something which I think might be the most radical thing I want to ask you to think about. So much of Christian theology and discussion happens in very narrow ways. David Ford writes about this as the different grammatical moods of theology. Non-linguists, stay with me here. There's a couple of linguists amongst our trustees who aren't here this evening. Are there any other linguists in the room? Okay, I have two. Which both means, oh good, there's two people who'll know what I'm talking about. It also means, oh dear, there's two people who'll know when I'm wrong. But I'm just talking about how it's really important to know that actually that we're wrong and to be regretful about it. So maybe that's what I'm going to need to do later. You can tell me after the talk. So theology usually happens in the indicative and imperative moods. That is to say, in fact or in command. So Christ is risen, he is risen indeed, is expressed as a fact, while love your neighbour is said as a command. Both of these show that they're very useful modes of language. There's an awful lot of theology for which they're totally appropriate. But fact and command get very tricky when we come to areas like morality. Ford offers some alternatives: questioning, experimental, and hopeful moods. Now, these are all really interesting, and in my forthcoming PhD, you'll be able to read a whole lot about them. But it's Friday night, and I'm not going to keep you here all evening. But I want to tell you about what I'm proposing in my thesis. I'm proposing a tentative mood or tentative voice. In my research, I was trying to find a way of expressing how chaplains in FE colleges manage to express sophisticated theological ideas with gentleness and politeness. I discovered that the Japanese language has a grammatical mood called tentative. It's a way of speaking and writing which offers rather than declares. I know next to nothing about Japanese. I know, in fact, this one thing about Japanese. But it gave me a start to describe something important about how some of us do theology, especially on tough issues, especially in marginal places. The tentative mood holds out an idea in the hand and wonders, how about this? I think this might be something. The tentative mood does not demand a robust refusal if you disagree. If somebody says to you, I think this might be something, look, I think I found something, you're very unlikely to shout at them if you think that they're wrong. It invites, oh, no, I think that's just a bit that fell off, not a wheelchair because we might need that again, but fell off something we broke and it can go in the bin. We might say, oh, no, actually, it's nothing. Or we might say, actually, no, it's this really precious thing. It's just what I was looking for. If we were like that with our morality, might not that be a better conversation? The tentative mood offers an idea that as important and worthwhile. And sometimes through offering that little thing that might have been nothing, we gain new and precious insight that would have been lost if we hadn't dared. Because if you pick up something on the floor and you're too ashamed to say, oh, I think this might be something, and you put it straight in the bin, what if it was the thing that somebody else really, really wanted? And a lot of our theological ideas, especially in the progressive church, can be like that. I think I found this thought. I think I might like to share it with you. So I'm going to give you an example, get a little bit more concrete. It's on the screen, but you don't need to look at it if you're zoning out here. That's really fine. It's Friday. So Here's a famous passage from the Gospels where Jesus walks on water. It's in 3 Gospels, but this version is from Matthew. So first of all, I'll read it. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he'd dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down from the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So here's it again, broken down into grammatical moods. So again, there's not going to be a test, but this is just to help you kind of understand what it is I'm talking about. So that first bit, when Jesus said to them, and Jesus says to them something which is like the Bible is full of, don't be afraid. It's like the number one message, especially of angels. Like, don't be afraid. Take courage. Don't be afraid. That's an imperative. That's a command. And I mean, there are times when "don't be afraid" could be a bit bossy and bullyish, but most of the time, if we tell somebody not to be afraid, it's an imperative, but it's nice, isn't it? It's, but the next bit, Peter, I'm saying this is tentative. This is what I mean by a tentative theological voice. If it's you, tell me to come to you. It's quite brave. It's not unsure of itself. It's not kind of copping out or being a bit woolly. It's pretty impressive to say, "I'm gonna get out on that water too." But it's just checking. It's just offering. There's just a little kind of condition there. Actually, it might turn out it was a ghost and I'm being stupid. The worst thing that could happen here is that I look stupid, but I'm just going to try. If it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And then we get around the sorry. Then we get more imperative from Jesus, "Come," and then we get some imperative from Peter when he starts falling, "Lord, save me." Then we get interrogative, questioning. Yeah, more in my PhD. Why did you doubt? And then the final one as just to show you indicative. So there's theology as fact, which is, sometimes we want to express things like that. Truly, you're the Son of God. Those of us who identify as Christians are fairly happy to say that. So I'm not in any way saying that there isn't a place for fact and command. But what would this passage be if Peter hadn't just tried something? Tentativity is a natural mood for progressive theologians to talk in. The voice of Peter in the passage offers a framework to explore new ideas with respect for the space that we're walking into. It offers an extraordinary idea, but it's prepared to be wrong. It doesn't mean that our passion is dimmed or the urgency of what we speak about is lessened, but it is predicated on humility. Like Peter, not only might we be wrong, but we often are. But staying in the boat would mean ignoring Jesus standing there in a new place where we might be able to join him. Let me give you an example of what I mean by being ready to be tentative as we explore morality from a progressive point of view. For this, I'm going to use the well-known Gen Z cultural touchstone, Antiques Roadshow. A programme that I'm a little bit on the young side for myself, but I have watched occasionally. They have a little segment that came to mind while I was preparing the talk. They look at 3 items. There's one of the things they do on the show, where they have 3 items, and they ask the question: basic, better, or best? So let's say it's 3 vases. So the 3 vases, they're all very nice, and or very ugly. I mean, you know, but other people might like them. And the presenter basically has to guess which is the basic one, which is the one that's a bit more valuable, and what's the one that's ridiculously valuable and you wouldn't want to have on Russell's list of things you broke. There isn't a bad vase or a good vase. There are 3, and they're all fine. In fact, they're probably all precious to somebody. But the presenter has to guess which one is which. There's no binary there. And of course, when it comes to judging antiques, there's a healthy dose of subjectivity anyway, which we might want to say there might well be about morality too. But basic, better, and best are a nice way of framing a way into tricky moral questions. Rather than fighting over who has the right answer, we could offer some reasons why we think we've got an idea and why it might be better. But we might then listen to somebody else who suggests an idea even better than that. Take the direct action of climate protesters. We all here already agree, I'm sure, that climate change is an urgent problem. You'd be welcome here if you didn't think that, but you probably wouldn't find many other people here who thought the same thing. But what is the right thing to do about it? Well, there's writing letters and signing petitions. Maybe that's the basic moral answer. But is it better or best to protest in such a way that causes major disruption and makes people angry? Or to protest more gently but risk letting the urgency of the situation slide by people? Rather than trying to fight about right and wrong ways to get the message out, we might find it better to acknowledge what other people are offering and to see if we can build on it or offer something better. Because the reality is that a lot of these complex moral questions, there isn't a right answer to, but there might be a better one. Morality is something I think we need to reclaim. It's a radical move on our part because it's risky. It's risky because of morality's historic relationship with shame, and it's risky because we'll sometimes get it wrong. But the things we need to be talking about are too important to leave to a single conservative Christian voice. Tentativity allows us to use all that we know about affirming one another and building consensus, but without apology for not winning the knockout blow. I think liberals can be too ready to accept that we're woolly and unsure. That's not necessarily the case. We're woolly and unsure some of the time. That's fair, but not all of the time. But sometimes we're really sure, but just more polite. Or we're really sure that something really matters, but we're cautious that actually we are the person who's got the perfect answer to it. But that's not a reason to engage and maybe offer something and maybe invite something. We all have the resources to do this at our disposal. We are good at listening, at understanding complexity, at holding things in tension which don't entirely cohere, but which are part of a picture we don't yet fully understand. We don't need to know everything and be right about everything to step up and into discussions about what is good and where God is in moral situations. One of the most radical things that we can do is offer out our hand and say, try this. I think it might be something. I think it might be God. Okay, Phew, I got through a talk about morality with a whole load of progressive Christians, and they clapped at the end. So, right, great. Did anybody want to ask any questions at this point? It's fine if you don't. I'm not going to be uncomfortable if now what we have is silence. But I did want to give you a chance. Patrick.
Sure. So, I need to be at the microphone.
No, because there's a microphone that magically picks it up.
Oh, exciting.
I checked that earlier.
So, as a bit of background, for those who don't know, like, SCM is affiliated to the World Student Christian Federation, and I was at their General Assembly last 2 weeks ago, maybe?
No, it was 1 week.
Whenever it was.
It was last week,
Weekend, yes. So, one of the conversations I was having with someone from Nigeria was about kind of how, well, her hypothesis essentially was that kind of evangelical Christianity is growing because there's a stronger sense of conviction and that people believe strongly and that convinces other people. So I was just kind of, this isn't exactly a question because I don't know how to frame it, but like how does, what is the balance between conviction and tentativity? How do you do both?
You will be delighted to know that my PhD supervisor asks this question. I should say I'm circling around a full draft after 10 years. Like it has been the great work of my life. Other people have brought up children in that time. I have just finally written my introduction, just the conclusion to go, and then rewriting all of everything in between. But so that question about is tentativity, does it not just sound like we aren't very sure? Now, it might mean that we're not very sure that what we're saying is definitely right, but that doesn't mean to say there's nothing inside us that is very sure. So to take it into the landscape of the chaplains that I work with. So chaplaincy in further education is even harder than chaplaincy in higher education because there's no tradition of it in further education, and there's not usually chaplaincy buildings or teams, and there's just this like masses of people going to learn bricklaying and hairdressing and there's certainly not going to be like a Christian group or something to work with. And in that context, a chaplain has to work out how to offer something in such a way that it can be received. And if in that context they push and are really, really like, you should do this, or you should believe that. The reality is, it wouldn't matter how sure they were, it wouldn't work. Whereas they might be very, very sure in their own mind of their own faith, but they're not. But they're prepared to have a conversation with the person in front of them. That say you're doing some ministry with like somebody, so 17-year-olds, perhaps having like the first important relationship of their lives, and they've just had their first row. Helping that young person work through that moment, you might be really sure what they ought to do, but you're probably actually just going to offer some things and see whether they're helpful. So I think what I want to say is that I've certainly seen evidence that tentativity can be more effective, not just more correct, if you see what I mean. I think it's pragmatic as well as right. Like, hey, I'm going to boldly say it since I'm talking about matters of right and wrong. I think that, it's interesting that you say that, though, going back to the question about conservative conservative propositions of Christianity, and certainly back in my days of working with a lot of Muslim chaplains as well, that used to get said about Islam as well. That always is why it's very popular in prisons, for example. It provides this very, very definite belief system and requirements and so on. I don't know if that's why people come to faith in those areas. I haven't done research on it, and I don't know enough of those people to be sure. But I think if we think of people we know who've become Christians in those contexts, sometimes it was the right place for them to become a Christian, but it might not be the right place for them to grow as a Christian. So maybe it's right for some people for their whole lives, and I'm fairly comfortable with that. But I'm really sure that it's not right for everybody for their whole lives. I feel like I said a lot there. Did I answer your question?
In a sense.
Okay. I feel like that'll do for a tentative answer.
Hello, yeah, I really liked your example with the chaplains that you just gave. I just wondered if you had kind of just a hand, but no worries if not, just kind of any more kind of practical examples of where you see this in play.
Ooh, great, really great question. So, I think that in my church, for example, so my partner and I lead a church of largely young progressive Christians. So our church doesn't look massively different to who I see in front of me here. And in that context, we do quite a lot of sharing in the kind of word section of the Sunday service, and I would say that the way that people share their theological ideas in that context is always in the tentative voice. And if somebody comes to join us, like somebody's mum came to join us on one occasion, and when somebody walks in and they start saying things, or they start praying a certain way or something, and you're just like, oh, hello, you're from a different tradition. It's like, oh, you're terribly welcome. Oh, well, we feel a little bit weird. And it really showed up for me how actually this is the way that we do it all the time. So if we might have the reading, and we might have a little bit of a homily or something, or a meditation or something, and then usually people will share something, or sometimes they'll just chip in during the homily, and usually they'll offer it in a, well, if this, maybe that, or just like, well, a lot of them haven't read the Bible before, or some of them haven't anyway, and so they don't know what they're supposed to think about. So they will kind of offer. So Amelia goes to my church. Am I being fair? Yeah, that's the way that people offer.
You summed it up very well.
Okay, yeah. So I would say, in that context, and I suspect that in your SCM groups, that actually probably that happens quite a lot too. Now it might be that it was motivated by politeness rather than a framework of a tentative theological voice, but I think it kind of comes out the same way. Yeah, I'll try and think of more concrete.
That was a good one, I thought. Anyway, good.
I've got no idea what the time is, because I stopped looking at my phone because my dad was ringing me. So I think it's high time that we finished. Just 1 second in case anybody else had a question. I don't think they did. Just checking I hadn't missed that. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for listening and letting me express some of my thoughts. I really want to emphasize that what I was suggesting was an idea, and I really think that we need to be radical, but the how we do it is up to all of us to work out how to do that. And I'm offering something, but I hope this weekend that you're going to as well.